The game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Constantly gets a bad rep for being one of those TCGs that's unkind to new players. This notion usually comes from aspects of the game such as the difficulty of comprehending weird rulings, the overwhelming feeling of learning the numerous ways to special summon monsters, or just the very intimidating nature of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! The point is, if you've never played Yu-Gi-Oh! Or haven't played the game in many years, getting back into it can feel borderline impossible at times. But that's where I come in. Hi, I'm Topsy and welcome to the channel. For today's video, we'll be focusing on one of those various aspects I listed before, more specifically, the Synchro Summon. But before we get started though, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and consider subscribing. It's easy, free, and helps a tremendous amount for creators such as myself. But with that out of the way, let's jump in. Synchro monsters are a beloved special summoning mechanic that's had a monumental impact on the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Introduced all the way back in 2008 in the game warping main set, The Duelist Genesis, from the very jump, synchro monsters make their presence be heard loud and clear, by giving rise to some of the strongest decks we've ever seen at that point in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Additionally, the subsequent introduction of synchro monsters was monumental for the birth of what we recognize today as modern combo decks. It's needless to say, but the contribution synchro monsters have had on the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cannot be overstated. But enough preamble, let's actually get into covering all the basics of the mechanic. Part 1. The basics of the Synchro Summon. So what should one know when it comes to synchro monsters? First off, synchro monsters are a special type of monster that resides in a player's extra deck. Since synchros are an extra deck monster, you can't just normal summon them like your main deck monsters. Secondly, a proper synchro summon can only be performed during one of your main phases, and these type of summons are also treated like a built-in summon, also referred to as an inherent summon. All this means, in case you're wondering, is that the summon does not start a chain, and that your opponent has a harder time responding to the actual summon. Third, the synchro summon is performed by using a tuner monster, more on this later, plus one or more non-tuner monsters. Additionally, the added up levels of the tuner and the non-tuner monster must add up to be the exact same level of the synchro monster you're planning on summoning. Fourth, when performing a synchro summon, the monsters used for that summon go directly to the graveyard, unless specified otherwise by an outside effect like Shifter or Macrocosmo, as an example. Lastly, what can and can't be used for a synchro summon? Synchro summons can only be done with face-up monsters on your side of the field. This is unlike fusions and rituals, which are able to use face-up and face-down monsters on their field, while also being able to access cards in their hand as well. But in addition to those face-up monsters on your field, those monsters must also have levels. This means that tokens and trap monsters are a-okay for synchro summons, while Xyz and Links are a no-go, since they don't have levels, obviously enough. But at its very core, that's all there is to the synchro summon. I'd say synchros are fairly simple when broken down. But now let's move on and tackle some of the less intuitive stuff for the rest of the video. Part 2. Tuner Monsters. In our last segment, I mentioned how we'd come back to talking about tuners. So let's address them now. Alright, so what's a tuner? In short, it's just a label. The tuner subtype was a new secondary typing introduced alongside synchro monsters. And to be completely honest with you guys, tuners were actually quite simple, since all they do is facilitate synchro summons. That's it. They're not all that special and or complicated to understand. Now then, how does one go about identifying a tuner monster? Well, if you haven't noticed by now, all you really need to do is check down here. Usually, every tuner monster will indicate that it's a tuner down there. For the most part, pretty much any monster in the game can be a tuner. This even includes cards in the extra deck, like Formula Synchron and Sea Monster of Theseus as an example. As I said earlier, there's nothing really all that special or unique to being a tuner monster. However, there is something really important to keep in mind. That being that every single synchro summon, and I mean every single last one of them, will need and require the use of a tuner monster, or else that summon will not be able to be performed. Now then, I want to wrap this segment up with one last thing, that being synchro substitutes. In case you're unfamiliar, a synchro substitute refers to a special group of tuner monsters that can substitute one of the required materials listed on a synchro monster. These monsters do tend to be archetype locked, however. The most famous example of this type of monster would have to be Quick Draw Synchron, a level 5 tuner that has the ability to be treated as inappropriate material of any synchro monster that requires a synchron tuner as material, and that's quite a few targets. However, it is still important to know that you'll still need to remain cognizant of the added up levels of the monsters being used. For example, if you were to use Quick Draw Synchron in order to summon Junk Warrior, you would need to find a way to reduce the level of that Quick Draw Synchron in order to properly summon that Junk Warrior, or else that summon won't be able to be performed, since both monsters are level 5. But with that being said, let's move on to our next segment. Part 3. Synchro Summon Variations. Most synchro summons will require the use of exactly one tuner plus one or more non-tuner monsters for their summon. However, there will be times that synchro monsters will allow or even require the use of multiple tuners for their summon. Take Red Nova Dragon as an example, one of my personal favorite synchros. This card specifically requires the use of 2 tuners for its synchro summon, while its evolved form, Red Supernova Dragon, requires a whopping 3 tuners. We also have cards like Crystron, Quarion, Gandrax, at least I think that's how you say that. Anyway, this card flips the way most synchro monsters list their required materials. Let me show you. As we can see, this synchro monster requires 2 or more tuners, but exactly 1 non-tuner monster as its materials. As I said, essentially flipping the way most synchro monsters list their materials. This is then mirrored by Trishula Dragon of the Ice Barrier, which lists 1 tuner plus 2 or more non-tuner monsters. Additionally, there are also times when synchro monsters will be very particular as to what exactly they need for this synchro summon, and other times when they're not too specific. Here's what I mean. Take as an example, Revived King Hades. This synchro monster specifically lists like Spreader Zombie as its specific tuner monster needed for its summon, while a card like Majestic Star Dragon lists 2 specific monsters needed for its summon, those being Majestic Dragon, a tuner, and Stardust Dragon, a synchro monster. While on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have a card like Double Xaver's Gotems, a monster that's notorious for various reasons, one of those being its summoning condition. This monster reads, must be synchro summoned using a tuner and an earth monster. If you didn't catch that there, here's the thing. This monster makes no specifications as to what type of earth monster it has to be, meaning that if you really wanted to, you could summon this monster by using nothing but tuner monsters. All this just to show you guys why it's so important to pay close attention to the synchro monsters you're summoning and their materials listed on them. Alrighty, onto our last segment of the day. Part 4. Synchro Summons via Card Effects. Normally, synchro summons are performed during one of your main phases by sending your tuner and your non-tuner monster to the grave manually. This is your typical synchro summon, but there are times when a synchro summon can be performed during different stages of a duel via a card effect. Examples of this can be seen with cards like Formula Synchron or Urgent Tuning, 2 cards that allow you to perform synchro summons during different stages of a duel. Formula Synchron letting you do so during your opponent's turn, and Urgent Tuning allowing you to do so during the battle phase. Effects like these usually do still perform a proper synchro summon. However, it's important to keep in mind that these type of summons are no longer built-in summons and will now be treated as a non-inherent special summon, thus meaning that they will start a chain and allow your opponent to respond to the activation of the effect, unlike a regular synchro summon where they can only respond to the summon afterwards, or prior with more specific cards. In addition to the last 2 cards we covered, here are a few more cards that allow synchro summons via card effects. Synchro Material is a trap card that lets you target a monster on your opponent's side of the field and use it as if you controlled it for a synchro summon. Then there's TG Cyber Magician, with the effect that allows cards in your hand to be used as synchro materials. But that's just naming a few, just to give you an idea of the variations when it comes to synchro summons. Last thing I want to cover for today's video is special summons that treat themselves as synchro summons, and special summons that outright cheat synchro monsters out of the extra deck. Let me elaborate. Some card effects allow a player to cheat out a synchro monster out of the extra deck while still treating that special summon as a proper synchro summon. An example of this can be seen with a card like Blackwing Twin Shadow. This card allows the player to target 2 Blackwing monsters, a tuner and a non-tuner, in their grave or in their banish pile, and shuffle them back into the deck to special summon a Blackwing synchro monster out of the extra deck. What's important to keep in mind here is that even though this special summon breaks the rules of the synchro summon and it's not a proper synchro summon as well, it's still considered as a proper summon because of the wording of the card. The card specifically states that the special summon is being treated as a synchro summon. This detail is important to keep in mind because this means that that synchro summoned monster will have the same benefits of a properly synchro summoned monster that includes being able to be revived from the graveyard or banished pile. We can then now move on and contrast it to a card like Starlight Road that has the effect that allows a player to special summon Stardust Dragon from the extra deck if 2 or more cards would be destroyed. In this example, that Stardust Dragon was not properly summoned, summoned, meaning that if it were to be destroyed or removed from field, even via its own card effect, it would not be able to be revived because it was never properly summoned. I believe these two examples perfectly encapsulate what exactly I mean by a proper summon and a non-proper synchro summon. So, in short, if a card says it's performing a synchro summon or it treats that summon as a synchro summon, you're golden. But if not, tread a little carefully. And that's the end of the video. I do hope you guys enjoyed your stay and learned something new, or at least understand the topic a little bit better. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a like and subscribe. But if not, let me know in the comments below. If there's something I missed, or is there another topic you'd like me to cover more in depth in a later video. But with that, I've been your pal Topsy. Thank you so much for stopping by and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.